Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to dig into this one today.
Yeah, me too. So to start us off, I want you to imagine, just for a moment, the sensory nightmare of standing on a cold, foreign beach in the dead of night.
Oh, man. Yeah.
You know, you've been camped on this sand for 10 relentless, grinding years. You are just completely exhausted. Your armor is dented. It's heavy. And, well, a lot of your friends are dead.
Right. And you are backed right up against the ocean. There's literally nowhere to go.
Exactly. The enemy has broken through your lines. They've pushed you to the brink of total annihilation. And they're so close that when you look out across the plains, you just see thousands of their campfires burning in the dark.
It's like a city of fire surrounding you.
Yeah. And, you know, with just absolute certainty that when the sun comes up, they're going to slaughter you and burn your ships to ash.
It is an atmosphere of total suffocating terror. And that is exactly where Homer places us as we step into this specific deep dive into the Iliad. We're looking really closely at books 7 through 10 today.
Which is such a wild section of the text.
It really is, because we are not dealing with the, romanticized marble statue version of Greek mythology today. We are dropping right into the dust, the blood, and the psychological breaking point of the Achaean or Greek army.
And I think the mission of our time in the text today is to kind of navigate that breaking point alongside these ancient warriors. Because underneath all the spears and the chariots, Homer is offering us this profoundly sophisticated analysis of leadership in crisis.
Yes.
He's showing us the mechanics of human honor and, frankly, the devastating consequences of unchecked ego. So we're looking for that enduring wisdom that we can, extract from a Bronze Age battlefield and apply directly to our own lives.
Right, because to find that wisdom, we have to look past the physical threat of the Trojans out on the plain, and we need to examine the internal rot within the Greek camp itself.
Yeah.
The overarching theme of these chapters is that systemic failure, it rarely starts with the enemy outside the gates, right? It almost always starts at the top of your own hierarchy.
Right, which means we really need to look at Agamemnon,
Yeah.
the supreme commander of the Greek forces.
Oh, yeah.
Because in Book 8, the tide of the war officially turns against him. And Homer gives us this terrifying image of, divine determinism to explain it.
The golden scales.
Yes. Zeus takes out this set of golden scales in the heavens. It's a concept the Greeks called charistasia, the weighing of fates. And he places the fate of the Greeks in one pan, the fate of the Trojans in the other, and the Greek side just sinks heavily down toward the earth.
Such a powerful visual, honestly. The sinking of the scales, it signifies doom, heaviness, death. And immediately after that happens, Hector, the greatest Trojan warrior, he just seizes the momentum.
He really does.
He drives the Greeks all the way back behind their defensive trenches, literally trapping them at their ships. And he's the one who orders those 1,000 campfires lit on the plain, specifically to inflict psychological torture.
Just to mess with them.
Exactly. He wants the Greeks to stare at their impending death all night long.
So the pressure cooker is at maximum heat. And what fascinates me is how Agamemnon reacts to this pressure in Book 9. Because he doesn't rally the troops.
No, not at all.
He doesn't give a soaring Shakespearean speech to stiffen their resolve. The text actually says he is weeping briny torrents.
Yeah, it's a complete breakdown.
He stands up before his hardened warlords, tears literally pouring down his face like a dark spring over a cliff, and he essentially tells them all to just give up. He says, we should drag the ships into the water and run away under the cover of darkness. The supreme commander completely shatters.
He does. And the silence in that tent after he speaks, it is deafening. I mean, these are men who have bled for a decade under his command, and they are watching his authority just evaporate in real time.
Wow.
Because what Homer is showing us here is the catastrophic failure of structural leadership when it is entirely divorced from moral authority. Agamemnon thought his title, his scepter, protected him. He thought he could command respect simply because he was the king of Mycenae.
Hold on, though. I am struggling to place all the blame on Agamemnon here, especially when we look at the root cause of why they are losing in the first place.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, the Greeks are losing because their best fighter, Achilles, is refusing to fight. Achilles is sitting in his tent, he's playing the lyre, actively watching his own countrymen get slaughtered on the beach. Isn't this just a massive, lethal ego trip on Achilles' part? Why are we dragging Agamemnon for a crisis that Achilles is clearly perpetuating?
So it's a really fair challenge, and it cuts right to the heart of the leadership dynamic here. Yes, Achilles is behaving with terrifying stubbornness. No one is denying that. But the text asks us to examine why he is sitting out.
Okay.
Diomedes, who is one of the fiercest Greek warriors, actually stands up right after Agamemnon finishes weeping, and he addresses this directly. He doesn't blame Achilles. He diagnoses Agamemnon.
Really? In front of everyone?
In front of everyone, Diomedes says, Zeus gave you the scepter, he gave you the right to rule, but he did not give you a brave and virtuous soul.
Oh, wow. So he essentially calls the CEO a coward in front of the entire board of directors.
Exactly that. I mean, Diomedes is pointing out that Agamemnon demanded absolute compliance during times of relative stability, right? But he never earned the deep, reciprocal loyalty of his men.
Yeah, because of what happened earlier.
Right. Earlier in the epic, Agamemnon publicly humiliated Achilles. He used his structural authority to steal Achilles' prize just to prove he could. He broke the fundamental trust of his most vital team member.
Which is such a fatal mistake.
It is, because you can rule by fear and hierarchy when the sun is shining, but when the campfires of the enemy are burning outside your walls, people will not bleed for a title. They only bleed for a leader they actually trust.
That distinction between structural authority and moral authority is just so sharp.
Yeah.
Like Agamemnon has the corner office, but he has zero capital left with his people. So in the middle of this massive leadership vacuum, with the king weeping and Diomedes yelling, we get an intervention from Nestor. And I want to spend some time on Nestor because he offers what feels like a masterstroke in crisis management.
He really does. Nestor is the oldest king there. He has lived through generations of heroes. He has seen entire kingdoms rise and fall. He understands the neuroscience of panic long before the science even existed.
Right, because while Agamemnon is entirely reactive, he's crying, he wants to flee. Nestor stands up and takes operational control without, technically usurping the king.
Right, he's very careful about that.
Yeah, first he immediately secures the perimeter. He orders sentries to man the trench. But then he does something that seems totally counterintuitive when you are facing annihilation.
Yeah.
He tells Agamemnon to host a feast in his tent for the senior commanders.
And if you think about the genius of that, the entire command structure is running on adrenaline, terror, and severe sleep deprivation. They are on the verge of literally turning on each other. Nestor knows that fear is highly contagious, but so is structured composure. So by insisting on a feast, he forces a change in the physical environment.
Right, he brings them inside, out of the wind, and the sight of those terrifying fires.
Exactly. He brings them into the king's tent. He makes them sit down. They have to go through the deliberate, very slow rituals of a Bronze Age feast.
Like the hand washing and all that.
Yeah. Washing hands, pouring libations to the gods, carving the meat, passing the wine. He's actively forcing their nervous systems to regulate. He is changing the atmosphere from reactive panic to deliberate counsel.
Wow.
Because Lester understands that you cannot make a civilization-saving strategic decision while you are completely drowning in cortisol.
That is an incredibly practical insight for anyone navigating high-stakes situations today. Just forcing the pause, changing the physical environment to break a cycle of panic.
Yes, absolutely.
But to really grasp what happens after this feast, when Agamemnon finally decides to try and, win Achilles back, we have to zoom out a bit. We have to look at the cultural architecture of the world these men are operating in. Because they aren't just fighting for survival.
No, they're not.
They are fighting within a very rigid framework governed by the gods and this ancient concept of honor.
Right. And the divine framework in the Iliad is incredibly oppressive. The gods are not distant, benevolent observers, They are partisan, they're petty, and they're immensely powerful.
Very petty.
Super petty. Like in Book 8, Zeus holds a council on Mount Olympus and just asserts his absolute tyranny over the other gods. He threatens that if any deity dares to interfere in the battle against his will, he will literally hurl them down into the deepest, darkest gulf of Tartarus.
Just throw them into the abyss.
Yeah, locking them in iron gates and a brazen threshold. He claims that he is stronger than all of them combined.
It really paints a picture of a universe where human beings are just crushed under the weight of divine will. Everything is so fatalistic. The scales are weighed and your doom is just sealed.
Right.
But against that terrifying backdrop of determinism, the humans in this text have sort of constructed their own system of meaning.
Yeah.
Like, if the gods control who lives and who dies, the humans control how they fight and how they are remembered.
Exactly.
Which leads us to this fascinating contrast in Book 7. The single combat between Hector and the giant Chimere warrior, Ajax.
Oh, this duel is the perfect lens through which to view the heroic kind. The two armies agree to a temporary pause, right? And Hector challenges the best of the Greeks to fight him one-on-one. Ajax wins the lot. And when these two step out into the space between the armies, there is zero pageant here. It is just a grueling, brutal, exhausting attempt to murder one another.
Yeah, the physical description is visceral. They are throwing spears with so much force, they pierce through 6 layers of oxide on a shield. And when the spears fail, they start hurling literal boulders at each other, trying to crush bones. They are absolutely fighting to the death.
But then the sun begins to set. Heralds from both sides step between them with their staffs and declare that the night has come and they must stop. And here is where the modern mind really struggles to comprehend the ancient world. Because they stop instantly. There is no cheap shot. There is no trickery. They separate and they speak to each other with profound mutual respect.
And it goes way beyond just respect, right? They exchange highly valuable gifts.
Yes.
Hector gives Ajax a silver-studded sword with a beautiful scabbard, and Ajax gives Hector a brilliant purple belt.
Yeah.
Like 2 men who 3 minutes prior were trying to crush each other's skulls with rocks are now handing over their most prized possessions.
Explain the mechanics of this to me. Like, why do this?
Okay, to understand this, we have to look at 2 Greek concepts, kleos and time. So kleos is immortal glory, the songs that will be sung about you after you die.
Okay, your legacy. Right. But time is the physical manifestation of your honor in the present moment. It is the armor, the gold, the prizes. In a world where your life can literally be ended by a stray arrow tomorrow, your honor is the only currency that actually matters.
So by exchanging these gifts, they are acknowledging each other's time.
Precisely. They recognize in each other an equal, unyielding devotion to the heroic code. They can try to kill each other because they are on opposing sides of a war, sure, but they are united in their adherence to the rules of honor. Hector and Ajax are mirrors of one another's greatness. The gift exchange, which is a form of ritualized guest friendship called xenia, it's an ultimate sign of respect.
You know, the closest modern parallel I can think of is the culture of high-level combat sports.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like you watch 2 mixed martial artists step into a cage, and for 25 minutes they inflict unimaginable physical damage on one another. They use every ounce of their training to completely destroy their opponent's strategy and body. Right. But the absolute second the final bell rings, the hostility evaporates, they embrace, they kneel in front of each other. It is this profound, almost sacred respect that can only exist between 2 people who have been in the fire, who know the terrifying cost of stepping into that arena.
That is a brilliant parallel, actually. The respect is not in spite of the violence. It is forged through the shared willingness to endure the violence under an agreed-upon set of rules. Hector and Ajax have honor because they play by the rules, even when it costs them blood.
Right. And understanding that deep, almost spiritual nature of honor is really the only way to understand the massive collision that happens back in the Greek camp in Book 9. Because Agamemnon is about to attempt to use the currency of honor to buy his way out of the crisis he created.
Yes. Following Nestor's advice at the feast we talked about, Agamemnon finally admits he needs Achilles, so he puts together an embassy to go to Achilles' tent. He selects Odysseus, who's known for his rhetorical brilliance, Ajax, representing the respect of a fellow frontline warrior, and Phoenix, an older man who is kind of a surrogate father to Achilles.
And Agamemnon does not send them empty-handed. In fact, he offers what has to be one of the most staggering buyout packages in literary history.
It's absurd.
He tells them to offer Achilles 10 talents of gold, 20 shining cauldrons, 7 tripods, 12 racehorses, 7 skilled women from Lesbos, and Briseis, the woman Agamemnon originally stole, swearing an oath he never slept with her.
And there's more.
Yeah. Furthermore, he promises that if they ever conquer Troy, Achilles can marry his own daughter and receive 7 entire cities as a dowry.
It is an overwhelming catalog of wealth. But we need to clarify what these items actually meant to a Bronze Age audience. When we hear tripods or talents of gold, we tend to just think of cash bonuses.
Like a big check.
But a talent of gold wasn't a coin. It was a massive, heavy ingot. A bronze tripod was a huge, 3-legged cauldron that required immense metallurgical skill to forge. These weren't just expensive items. In the Bronze Age gift economy, these items were Jura's prizes of honor.
So they aren't just a paycheck.
Right.
They are physical proof of your worth as a human being.
Yes. When a warrior accumulated tripods and gold, he wasn't planning on, spending them at a market. He displayed them. They were the physical, tangible weight of his soul's value.
which makes Agamemnon's original insult so much worse. When Agamemnon used his authority to take Briseis away from Achilles back in Book 1, he wasn't just docking his pay. He was publicly, spiritually stripping Achilles of his worth in front of the entire army. He committed a kind of spiritual murder.
That is the exact insight we need to grasp here, and it explains why this embassy in Book 9 is a catastrophic failure. Agamemnon thinks he can patch over a spiritual murder with a mountain of treasure. Odysseus goes into Achilles' tent, lays out this incredible list of wealth, and Achilles flatly, aggressively rejects every single piece of it.
Achilles essentially looks at Odysseus and says, "You can take all of that gold and shove it."
He really does.
He points out the hypocrisy of the entire war effort. He says, "I have sacked 24 cities for you. I spend my days bleeding in the dust and my nights sleepless." And every time, Agamemnon sits safely by his ships, takes the vast majority of the treasure, and hands out little scraps to the men doing the dying.
Achilles is diagnosing a fundamentally broken social contract. Agamemnon wants the loyalty of a king, but he operates with the greed of a pirate. Achilles realizes that Agamemnon's gifts aren't an apology. They are an attempt to reassert dominance. If Achilles accepts the gifts, he is acknowledging that Agamemnon is wealthy enough to buy his submission.
Translating this into 21st century realities is incredibly sharp, honestly. This challenges exactly how we perceive conflict resolution in our organizations and relationships today.
How so?
Well, Agamemnon is the archetypal toxic leader who has publicly humiliated, disrespected, and burned out his most talented executive. Now, the company's facing bankruptcy, the Trojans are at the ships, and the leader tries to throw massive stock options and a corner office at the executive to fix the mess.
And Achilles' reaction is the timeless human response to that kind of manipulation. Once the core dignity of a relationship is violated, no amount of compensation can repair the breach. Achilles actually tells Odysseus that even if Agamemnon offered him wealth equal to the sand on the shore or the dust in the fields, he still wouldn't take it. The issue is no longer about compensation. The issue is trust.
Wow. But Odysseus isn't the only one who tries to persuade him. I want to look at Phoenix's attempt, because this is where it gets highly emotional. Phoenix doesn't use logic or lists of gold. He practically weaponizes his history with Achilles. He cries, he talks about bouncing Achilles on his knee as a baby, and he tells a long parable about an ancient hero named Meleager.
Right. The Meleager story is a very targeted warning. Meleager was also furiously angry at his people and refused to fight while his city was under attack. He waited so long that the city was practically burning before he finally stepped in. He saved them, sure, but because he waited until the absolute last second, his people gave him no gifts, no honor, no time. So Phoenix is saying, don't wait until the ships are actually on fire, Achilles, or your return will have no glory.
But even this highly emotional, manipulative plea completely bounces off Achilles. Why doesn't the emotional angle work here?
Because Achilles is undergoing a profound psychological shift. He can no longer compartmentalize the insult. Phoenix tries to leverage their bond, saying, "I love you like a son." But Achilles responds with a chilling boundary. He says, "If you are truly my friend, you must hate the man who injures me."
He is demanding absolute loyalty.
Yes. Achilles' pride has become his entire identity. The emotional wound is so entrenched that he is willing to watch his friends die rather than compromise his newly hardened boundaries.
That is deeply sobering, because at Book 9, the embassy to Achilles is the ultimate case study in how not to manage conflict. Book 10 offers us a stark, brilliant counter-narrative. It shows us how to actually navigate high-stakes pressure, team building, and survival.
The transition into Book 10 is really jarring. The embassy has failed. Achilles is staying in his tent. The Achaeans are still facing total destruction at dawn. None of the leaders can sleep. Agamemnon is wandering the camp, literally tearing his hair out by the roots, groaning from the bottom of his heart.
So they decide to call a midnight council out by the defensive trench, right in the shadow of the Trojan fires. And Nestor, ever the tactician, asks for a volunteer to sneak into the Trojan camp in the dark to gather intelligence. It is, by all definitions, a suicide mission.
And Diomedes, who is rapidly emerging as the most effective, clear-headed leader in the camp, he volunteers immediately. He throws a lion's skin over his shoulders, grabs his spear, and says he will go. But he sets a condition. He says, "By mutual confidence and mutual aid, great deeds are done. Let me choose a partner."
And this is where we get a profound lesson in team building. You are going on a highly dangerous, physically demanding stealth mission behind enemy lines. Ajax, the giant, the human tank we saw throwing boulders earlier, is standing right there, practically begging to go. But Diomedes does not pick Ajax.
No, he doesn't pick the muscle. He picks Odysseus. Diomedes says he chooses Odysseus because of his mind, his strategy, and the fact that Athena, the goddess of wisdom and tactical warfare, favors him. Diomedes knows himself perfectly. He knows he possesses immense raw physical force and courage, but he knows that force alone will get you killed in the dark.
He drafts for his blind spots.
Exactly. He drafts metis cunning, tactical brilliance, the ability to think sideways. He pairs his aggression with Odysseus's caution. It is the perfect symbiosis of leadership traits.
Okay, I hear what you're saying about drafting for blind spots, but doesn't Odysseus have a reputation for being a bit slippery? He's the guy known for deception, for lies. Why trust the guy who relies on trickery when your life is on the line in the dark?
Because in the dark, against a superior force, trickery is the only thing that will keep you alive. Diomedes isn't looking for a Boy Scout, he's looking for a survivor. He trusts Odysseus's alignment. Their shared goal is the survival of the Greek army. And Homer gives us a brilliant, dark mirror to this successful pairing over in the Trojan camp.
Right, because Hector also wants intelligence, and he asks for a Trojan spy to volunteer. A man named Dolon steps forward. But look closely at Dolon's motivation. He doesn't step up out of a sense of duty or to protect his city or to pair his skills with someone else.
No, Dolon is entirely driven by ego and greed. He tells Hector, "I will go, but only if you swear an oath to give me Achilles' immortal horses and his bronze chariot when we win the war." He demands the absolute highest, most glorious prize imaginable before he will lift a finger.
He is motivated purely by individual vanity. And the contrast in how these two missions unfold is devastating. Diomedes and Odysseus are moving through the dark like predators, aligned in purpose. Dolon is out there alone, wearing a wolf skin, dreaming of riding in a golden chariot.
And the moment Dolon is intercepted by Diomedes and Odysseus, his intrinsic weakness is immediately exposed. When the pressure of reality hits him, when he realizes he is caught, he completely shatters. He doesn't fight. He doesn't try to escape. He drops to his knees, bursts into tears, and instantly tries to bargain his way out by offering his captors a ransom.
He spills absolutely everything. Without them even having to torture him, he draws them a verbal map of the entire Trojan camp. He tells them where Hector is meeting, where the guards are posted, and he explicitly sells out a newly arrived Thracian king named Rhesus, who is sleeping unguarded with a legendary team of snow-white horses. Dolon sells out his own allies to save his own skin.
Because his motivation was entirely extrinsic. A promised bribe of horses cannot sustain human courage when a spear is pointed at your throat. Only intrinsic commitment, the kind of mutual survival bond shared by Diomedes and Odysseus, holds up under existential terror.
The practical application here is really searing. First, audit your team building. When you face a massive challenge, it is deeply comfortable to surround yourself with people who share your exact skill set and temperament. But it's a trap. You have to actively draft your Odysseus, the person who compensates for your blind spots, who sees the angles you miss.
Right. And the second reflection is auditing motivation. You must ask what is genuinely driving your organization. Are people aligned with the collective survival and success of the group? Or are you relying on the Dolons of the world, people driven entirely by individual greed? Because when the market crashes or the crisis hits, the people driven purely by the bonus structure will fold instantly and sell you out.
Yeah, that's such a good point. But as much as we can admire the teamwork of Diomedes and Odysseus, we do have to confront what they actually do with the information Dolon gives them. Because what happens next is incredibly brutal, and I know modern listeners are going to instinctively recoil from it.
We are definitely entering the territory of severe obstacles to growth here. Ancient texts will often violently challenge our modern ethical sensibilities, and Book 10 contains some of the darkest actions committed by our supposed heroes.
Let's look at the mechanics of Dolon's capture. Dolon is begging for his life. Odysseus questions him and uses very subtle, slippery language. He tells Dolon to dismiss his fears, heavily implying that if Dolon cooperates, they will spare his life. So Dolon spills all the secrets about King Rhesus, and the moment he finishes talking, he reaches up his hand to touch Diomedes' chin.
We need to explain that gesture. Reaching for the chin or grasping the knees was the physical act of haikateia, the ancient Greek ritual of supplication. It was a sacred, legally binding act protected by Zeus himself. If an enemy assumed that posture, you were religiously obligated to hear their plea and generally spare them for a ransom. It was the Bronze Age equivalent of waving a white flag and surrendering as a prisoner of war.
But Diomedes doesn't accept the surrender. While Dolon's hand is still reaching out in that sacred gesture, Diomedes swings his sword and decapitates him. Homer describes it with horrific clarity. He says Dolon's head was still muttering as it hit the dust. Diomedes deliberately breaks a sacred rule.
He does. And the violence doesn't end there. Using Dolon's intel, Diomedes and Odysseus sneak into the Thracian camp. While King Rhesus and his men are deep in sleep, completely unaware they are even in danger, Diomedes moves through them like a lion through a flock of sheep. He slaughters 12 men as they sleep. He then murders King Rhesus while the king is in the middle of a nightmare, and they steal the snow-white horses, riding back to the Greek camp in triumph.
We expect our heroes to possess honor. We expect them to show mercy to prisoners, to fight fair, to not assassinate defenseless men in their sleep. Modern readers want Diomedes and Odysseus to be the good guys, but this is a cold-blooded slaughter.
And that modern horror is valid, but the value in this text is not in finding perfect moral role models. It is in confronting the horrific, uncompromising nature of total war. Homer is stripping away our sanitized cinematic expectations of heroism.
He is forcing us to look at what survival actually requires when the campfires are burning outside your walls.
Precisely. The rules of civilized engagement are a luxury of peacetime. In this moment, the Greeks are facing extermination. If they fail tonight, every man in their camp dies and every woman is enslaved. Dolon is an enemy spy. Letting him live, even as a captive, is a logistical and security liability they simply cannot afford in the dark. Assassinating King Rhesus before he can join the battle at dawn might save hundreds of Achaean lives.
It's the ultimate ethical nightmare of pragmatic leadership. It forces the reader to consider what they would actually be willing to do if their family, their people, their very existence was on the line. Ancient heroism, in this context, wasn't about moral purity. It was about brutal, ruthless effectiveness on behalf of your people.
It acts as a mirror, showing us that beneath our civilized norms, the capacity for ruthless survival tactics remains intact. We may find it abhorrent, but we must understand that in extreme crises, survival often dictates actions that peace would condemn.
That deep discomfort brings us perfectly to the necessity of discernment. We cannot read the Iliad and blindly endorse the actions and values it presents. We have to actively filter the enduring human wisdom from the deeply problematic ancient social assumptions.
Absolutely. Reading ancient literature requires a mature, critical lens. You have to be able to separate the underlying principle from the cultural execution. Let's look back at Book 9, at the gifts Agamemnon offered Achilles to make amends.
Yes, the list of wealth. Alongside the gold and the tripods, Agamemnon casually offers 7 lovely captives of the lesbian line. He treats the enslaved woman Briseis entirely as a bargaining chip, an object to be passed back and forth between men to settle a score. And it's not just captive women. He treats his own daughters as political currency, explicitly stating he will throw in 7 cities as a dowry just to purchase Achilles' loyalty.
The cultural assumption here, the commodification of human beings, specifically women, as property to measure male honor, is something we absolutely discard. It is abhorrent. But the enduring wisdom embedded within the scene remains valid.
The enduring wisdom being the necessity of restitution. When a leader fundamentally wrongs a subordinate, an empty apology is just manipulation. Real restitution must be made to balance the scales of justice. Agamemnon, despite his flaws, recognizes that his actions require massive, tangible restitution.
Exactly. The principle of repairing broken trust through sacrificial restitution is timeless. The method of that restitution in the Bronze Age is what we reject. And we must also apply this discernment to Achilles himself. Modern readers often try to romanticize Achilles' anger over Briseis, framing it as a tragic love story.
We want him to be angry because his heart is broken.
But he explicitly states that his anger is rooted in his honor. He does say he loved her, slave as she was, but his rage is driven by the fact that his geras, his physical prize, the proof of his superiority, was stolen by a man he considers inferior. It is an ego wound of the highest order, not a modern romantic tragedy.
So the practice of discernment for you, the listener, is to examine how power dynamics shape what any society considers valuable. The Bronze Age Greeks valued martial honor so immensely that they commodified human lives to measure it. We must look at our own culture and ask, what do we commodify today to measure our success, our status, or our honor? We have to be critical of the invisible water we are swimming in, while still gleaning the universal truths about pride and conflict from these ancient pages.
That is the highest function of engaging with great texts. And if we peel back those ancient cultural limits, we find at the very center of Achilles' struggle a profoundly universal philosophical crisis that resonates just as deeply today as it did 3,000 years ago.
This is where Achilles stops being just a stubborn warrior and becomes a deeply relatable human being. In Book 9, during his rejection of Odysseus, Achilles reveals the ultimate dilemma of his existence. It is a prophecy given to him by his goddess mother, Thetis.
Ah, yes, the prophecy of the two fates. Thetis told him that he carries two alternate destinies, and the choice is entirely in his hands. If he stays at Troy and fights, his physical life will be violently cut short. He will die young on the battlefield. But he will achieve Kleos' aphthoton undying, immortal glory. His name will be sung forever.
But the other path, if he walks out of his tent tomorrow, boards his ships, and sails back home to Phthia, leaving the war behind.
If he sails home, the glory is forfeit. History will forget he ever existed, but he will live a long, peaceful, quiet life. He will grow old, see his children grow, and die peacefully in his bed.
It is the ultimate existential crossroad. Is it better to burn incredibly bright and incredibly short, leaving a massive legacy that changes the world, but sacrificing your actual lived experience to do it? Or is it better to live long, quietly in the present moment and be entirely forgotten by time?
This tension is found across almost all wisdom traditions, but Homer places it right in the middle of a war zone. And what is so striking is that Agamemnon's insult has triggered a massive reassessment of values for Achilles. Before the insult, Achilles was all in on the short, glorious life. But the disrespect shattered his belief in the heroic code.
Achilles looks at the ambassadors and delivers one of the most haunting realizations in literature. He essentially says, what is the point of all this? The coward dies and the brave man dies. We all go to the same dirt. He actually says, life cannot be bought with heaps of gold. Once the soul flees the barrier of the teeth, it does not return.
He is realizing that time, the physical honor, the tripods, the gold is completely meaningless to a corpse. He realizes that a legacy, Kleos, is just a song sung by people who are still breathing while the hero is rotting in the ground. Is that song worth sacrificing the only conscious experience of life you will ever get?
This feels intensely modern to me. Think about the modern architecture of ambition. The startup founder who sleeps under their desk, who destroys their health, who misses their children's birthdays, all because they want to make a dent in the universe. They want to leave a legacy.
Or the executive who sacrifices every authentic personal relationship for the corner office, the prestige, and the title.
Yes. Contrast that with the person who intentionally steps off the corporate ladder. The person who chooses family, who chooses a quiet neighborhood, who chooses to be fully present in their daily life, knowing they will never be famous, but they will actually experience being alive. Achilles is sitting in his tent, looking at all the gold the world has to offer, and realizing it is absolute dust compared to the simple act of breathing.
The realization paralyzes him. It is the eternal tension between future achievement and present existence. Achilles hasn't made his final choice yet, but the agonizing weight of the decision makes him one of the most compelling characters ever written. He is wrestling with the brutal reality of human mortality.
It asks a question that everyone must face at some point. What are we actually sacrificing our time for? What is the real return on investment of our life force?
Exactly. And that profound question of what we are building and why we are pouring our life force into it brings us to a final thought I want to leave you with today. It connects back to a brief moment in Book 7.
Oh, the Achaean wall.
The wall.
Ugh.
To protect their ships from Hector's assault, the Achaeans frantically build a massive defensive wall with a deep trench. They toil over it, sweating and bleeding to construct a monument to their fear and their desperate desire for security. But Homer gives us a glimpse of the gods watching this. Poseidon, the god of the sea, looks down at this massive human achievement, and he is deeply offended. He is jealous that the humans are building something that might outlast the ancient walls of Troy, which the gods themselves built.
And how does Zeus respond to calm Poseidon down?
Zeus makes a chilling promise. He tells Poseidon that as soon as the war is over and the Greeks sail away, Poseidon has permission to unleash the waves. He promises that the sea will wash the entire wall away. Vast drifts of sand will cover the shore, the ruin will vanish completely, and the very name of the wall will be erased from the earth. Total erasure.
That puts everything into perspective, doesn't it?
It really does. So consider this. Look at the walls and the legacies you are frantically building in your own life right now. The titles, the bank accounts, the reputations, the relentless projects. Are you building them out of fear, like the Greeks trapped on the beach? And more importantly, how permanent do you really think those walls are against the relentless tides of time?
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.